Welcome everyone to my talk. My name is Joel Orlina. I'm an engineering manager with Sonatype, and I'm here to talk today about this rather scintillatingly phrased topic, the secret life of Maven Central. If you read the abstract for the talk, I think there's something in there about how constant, how regular Maven Central is. It's like the stars. You know, they're always there. You never notice them until you actually look. And I've been with Sonatype since September of 2010, so it'll be my 12th year at Sonatype, and Maven Central predates me by 3 years. And I've been responsible for the care and feeding of Maven Central, whether directly or through a team that I support as an engineering manager. And so today I'd like to go through some slides and give you a glimpse into what it's like to take care of this thing that serves our community that you've potentially published to already. Thank you. And let's see what we can discover. If you'll indulge me, one slide about what Maven Central is, I'd like to open with that. I'd like to give some perspective on, how I view it. I feel like everyone here probably already has some idea what Maven Central is, and I don't mean to repeat material, but we'll just devote one slide to that, and then we'll move into a high-level architecture where I'll break down the major services that make it up from my perspective. I'm not intending to go into a really deep dive architecturally. If there are questions about it, I'm happy to make myself available. But what I want to do is give people an idea of the scope with the high-level architecture, and then we'll actually see how that plays out in numbers in terms of usage and growth over time. Once we're done with that, the next phase is really just drilling into the day-to-day operations. And we're going to focus on what ended up being a very eventful year, probably for everyone in here, which is 2021. And I think that'll source a lot of questions and a lot of interest in what's next for Maven Central. I'll close with some slides around things that the Central team has already got underway. We'll have a sneak preview of something that perhaps folks here would like to help assist with in terms of the future direction. And I'll talk about other involvements that are outside of what people normally associate with Maven Central. People, what work we're doing in the larger open source software repository space. And my hope is that there'll be time for us to, ask questions and for me to provide answers, 5 to 10 minutes at the end. So the background image in this slide, if folks get copies of the slide decks, I actually included the Wikipedia link. There's an article there called Blind Men and an Elephant. And it's a parable originally sourced somewhere on the Indian subcontinent. We're not actually sure when. And from there it spread. There are actually English poems about this. This particular image is from, I think, the Edo period in Japan. And if folks haven't heard the parable, it, strangely enough, involves 6 blind men and an elephant. For whatever reason, they're asked to describe this thing that they've never experienced before. They're all blind, and each of them takes hold of a different part of the elephant. One grabs the tail and says, "It feels like a rope." One grabs the tusk and says, "Oh, it's not unlike a snake." The other one, the tusk, it's sharp, pointy, like a spear. Someone grabs their arms around the trunk, says, "Oh, it's a mighty tree." And the other one, last one I think, puts his hands against the back of the elephant. "Oh, this is a sturdy wall." The story takes a few turns depending on who's telling it. In the end, in most of them, the blind men all come to blows because they believe that the tiny thing, the tiny piece of the elephant they've experienced is the absolute truth. And they argue over who's right. And I'm not sharing this parable because, there's ever been any history of people in a room like this saying my experience of Maven Central is the only truth and the absolute one. But depending on how you interact with Maven Central, you've probably interacted with just some small part of it. Your build systems certainly interact with them when they download dependencies. Perhaps you search for a component on search.maven.org. That's fed by the same set of services. Perhaps you've been using Central since the old days, and when you wanted to find what the latest version was, you just browsed to repo1.maven.org and clicked through all the directories to see if, version 2.0 was finally out. Well, that's all Maven Central as well. I particularly like this slide because in the Wikipedia article, so many of them are so much more calm and contemplative, but this one is the most chaotic. And this represents my experience of Maven Central. Maven Central is not unlike an actual elephant. It's a beast. It's huge. When it becomes unruly, it's hard to make it behave. It is very expensive to feed, to clean, and to maintain. And the next slides, I hope, will give you an impression of what the team I support does today, and we'll go dig into what we've done in 2021. But if you've ever experienced Maven Central, you probably haven't experienced it in its entirety, and I hope to provide a little bit of background today. All right, this is a very high-level architecture. So the left column here, I've broken down into potentially 3 different blind men. There are publishers at the top, repository users, and the middle search users at the bottom. And we'll go clockwise through the pieces. If you've ever published anything to Maven Central, you are ultimately interacting with a Sonatype product, a very large Nexus repository manager 2 instance. There are actually several of them. And when I get to the year in review for 2021, I'll actually explain why there are several of them. But if you ever worked with the Sonatype Nexus repository, it's an artifact manager, it's an artifact repository, not unlike Artifactory. And we use this to run staging rule sets. This is how we enforce certain requirements for artifacts that are allowed to be published in Maven Central. You have to have a POM, it has to have certain elements, you must provide sources in Java docs. There are several other rule sets that fire, and we very much require Nexus Repository Manager 2 functionality to guarantee that. And once you've passed all the quality checks, the line leads to, I believe this is the official AWS S3 bucket logo. I've included some Jenkins butlers here since that's what we do for a lot of our orchestration. The S3 bucket itself gives us a place that we put artifacts that we never delete. And, if anyone here has sort of asked if I can change or remove something from Central and had me tell them no, this results in a repository that is always growing. And thankfully, we have AWS providing us with a place that we can always have publishers put new components in and not have to worry too much about us ever having to run out of space and add a new disk. Now, it is possible to serve artifacts directly out of S3 as a public website bucket, but to enable the global reach, to enable this high level of performance to a global community, we've partnered with Fastly, who is a CDN provider. We actually have a long relationship with them. I believe that we were in touch with their founders after having used a different CDN, Edgecast, and realizing that we needed a little bit more customization. We needed it to be a little bit more developer friendly for some of the things that we needed to do when we serve artifacts. Customizing headers, making sure we had tight control over purging of artifacts whenever new ones are published, purging, I think, 404s. And Fastly is not only an incredibly high performance global CDN, but they are very developer friendly. Their API exposes anything you can do in the console and is extremely robust and extremely easy to work with. It's actually built on Varnish, so a lot of the special things we do with central components we've written in VCL, which is fairly mature technology, and it's the nicest thing about all of this infrastructure is how we've made choices to ensure that we scale to the demand of the global Java community. I suppose what I'm about to say is equally applicable between AWS S3 buckets and Fastly. It's not often that AWS goes down. It's not often that Fastly goes down. And if either of them goes down, the entire internet feels it. I've been telling versions of this story every day, and I say, hey, do you remember when Fastly then went down? And like the first person I asked about, it's like, yeah, like 20% of the internet was down. Like today, people are saying, yeah, 50% of the internet went down when Fastly went down. And so, when Maven Central goes down, there's a chance you have other problems. And I think that this is something that, over the 12 years that I've been here, is something that Sonatype is very proud of us having made these choices, for being able to not sweat the architecture of scale, because we partner with people whose jobs it is to architect for scale and to provide that level of consistency and availability. And so the repo, sorry, thought somebody was asking a question. The repo users are representative of, not just people who are, typing nvn clean install on their command line, but also all the automation. In this world of CI/CD, every time I look at the logs, it always amazes me how many of the user agents are from machines. And depending on who you ask, this number could be in the tens of millions and the hundreds of millions. I have numbers for actual download counts and petabytes of data that have been downloaded in subsequent slides. But this is the experience of Central that I think most of the world is used to, being able to consume the artifacts from Fastly. And if we go look at a later slide, I'll compare what the size of the publishing community looks like, and it's it's certainly dwarfed in comparison to the people who are downloading. Sonatype also runs search.maven.org. It's actually my first project at Sonatype. We launched that in January of 2011, and it's just a full text search interface on top of the contents of Maven Central. We index the contents, like their names, the metadata in the POMs. We actually crack open the jar files and we'll index the class names. I don't know how many people here use the full search API, but there is an API call you can make to search for a file name across all of Maven Central and return all the hits, the jars that contain them. The icon next to search users is, I think, AWS's Elastic Beanstalk. So a little bit of mature AWS technology, but we use Elastic Beanstalk to scale multiple clusters to serve that full text index, which I believe we store in Apache Solr, through a minimal web app that then users interact with directly, whether it's using a React-based web UI or whether it's using the REST API directly. And in the corner, I wanted to put a few more icons in there. There's more Jenkins shipping from S3 to Elastic Beanstalk, but we actually have sort of the meta services that support all of this processing. If you've signed up to Maven Central to publish, you've probably created a user on issues.sonatype.org. So there's a little Jira logo there. Issues.sonatype.org, sorry, is the Jira where not only you trigger all of the automation behind asking for a namespace or validating that you're allowed to publish to that namespace, but also where you get support from the Maven Central team. I like to make a point of, even if the automation takes care of most of the work, trying to eyeball all the interesting people who have signed up, all the interesting project names. So it's nice. I've actually met people today where I think I've recognized their name from having looked at maybe close to 80,000 issues inside the OSSRH project. Finally, there's another Atlassian logo down there. That's for a status page. So status.maven.org. I actually feel is a thing that we don't advertise often enough. We have automated monitoring. You can subscribe to status.maven.org for alerts. We actually use status.maven.org to send tweets out under the Sonatype Ops account based on whether any of the supporting services is having issues. So we will actually notify on how long it takes for, on average, for artifacts that are published to reach Maven Central. That's the search publish lag number. And then if any of the services are unreachable, we will also alert on that. And it's another way that we communicate with the community, and it's a piece of Atlassian functionality that we take advantage of to make sure that people are abreast on whether Central is available. Thankfully, we tend not to have to report on incidents related to the repo user side of it, Fastly. Every now and then, and I think 2021, we had several opportunities where the publishers were impacted, and those, if you look at status.maven.org, you'll actually be able to see the historical impact. And then I think search.maven.org as well. Those incidents have been communicated over the past couple of years on status page. All right, a couple slides here showing Central by the numbers. Sonatype publishes the State of Open Source Software report every year. And every year somebody at Sonatype asks me to produce these numbers. So this is 2021. And, that billion, right? It's 9 zeros. And, we're almost at half a trillion for or we almost hit half a trillion in 2021. I'm looking at the charts now, and there's a little bit of unevenness. In a later slide, you'll actually see how seasonal Maven Central is. But conservatively, I think we'll probably crack 600, billion requests this year. And requests don't always result in a successful download. This is the biggest number I can find. So every now and then you're going to request something that doesn't exist. So this counts the 404s as well. But this is not a trivial amount of of activity. I think that we like to sort of break it down all sorts of different ways. 11 billion a week. But yeah, whether it's you as publishers or individual consumers, whether it's the companies you work for, whether it's various build farms, Maven Central is under this type of load all day, every day, 24/7. So let's slice these numbers differently in terms of the actual components themselves, not just people's desire to use them. There were 8.8 million component versions, and this was as of last week before I hopped on a plane to come to London. And this is at the version level. So log4j 2.14.2, published by org Apache logging. And if we, I sometimes get the question, great, well, how much does this all occupy on disk? Well, it's about 27 terabytes and growing. And that number never goes down. We don't age anything out. Something hasn't been touched. We don't move it to cold storage. That 27 terabytes is just going to keep growing, which, makes the choice of having some sort of object store in the cloud that never runs out of room extremely critical. The last number is the one that I think is most interesting. So if we take the number of group IDs, and I've provided synonyms for how I like to think of group IDs here. They're either namespaces or organizations or publishers. That number is almost 80,000. And a group ID may not be an individual, and if it isn't an individual, it's usually, a small organization all the way to a very large enterprise. And, if you're a very large enterprise, you tend to have more detailed levels of organization. So, com.microsoft, for example, won't have everything under com.microsoft. You may have com.microsoft.azure, com.microsoft. Whatever. And so, there's a little bit of wash here in terms of how many actual organizations are represented. But I just want to give you a little bit of that order of magnitude, right, for the number of, people or organizations who are currently publishing to Maven Central. Oh boy, here it is. So there's going to be a slide for each of these, timeline events, except for the first one. I wanted to have something to denote the beginning of the year, and I like calling out that on January 4, Sonatype Central team actually doubled in size. There were 2 people who played an operational role on all the services I called out on that high-level infrastructure, myself and another DevOps engineer, and we brought on 2 more. And we got funding, we got support from Sonatype as an organization saying, we have done this good work for so long, but we've been doing it with far too few people to actually listen to the community that uses, listen to publishers who say, oh, this is a little bit of a high friction thing to me. If only there were this little improvement here. Listen to people say, oh, search.maven.org is down again. Could we do anything to scale it up? Could we do anything to actually, provide better results or better grouping of results? So we made an effort and actually found, 2 new team members. This was right around the same time that Sonatype as a company went about readopting Scrum as our agile methodology company-wide, and it was great because I had a new team, and I was able to share with this new team 3 hours worth of slides and talks. A lot of the information that I actually am sharing with you today, I just pulled from presentations I did in January 2021, and we had so much momentum going into the first week of February. I believe that we had sprint grooming on Monday, sprint planning scheduled for Wednesday. And I believe that February 3 was a Tuesday. I'm not sure if anybody here was impacted by the Bintray shutdown, or at least the announcement of the shutdown. Bintray is a open source software repository, not unlike Maven Central. They actually said that they were a superset of Maven Central, including not only our contents, but contents of other Java open source repositories. They had other centers as well, Conan Center, which I think may still be running. But they announced on February 3, the day before our sprint was supposed to start, that they were no longer going to allow people to publish to Bintray or to JCenter And I think in one of their original releases, press releases, they said that they would actually sunset the entire site, and you wouldn't be able to download these artifacts. I think that they've since sort of made plans to continue allowing the downloads. I think the most recent version of this link press release actually says that JCentral might still be around in read-only mode. But if you weren't impacted by this, I can tell you that the people who were thrown into a bit of a, I don't know, panic. For years, and Bintray has been around 4 years as a, competitor repository to Maven Central. People published to Bintray instead of Maven Central, and they were faced with the possibility that there would be no place for the components they published that were depended on, not just by their organizations, but the greater Java community. I think Bintray hosts several Gradle and Android repositories that are in wide distribution. They were faced with the possibility of those no longer being accessible by the Java community. Now, some people on Bintray, having read their documentation, knew that there was a way to use Bintray to publish directly to Maven Central. You actually go through the same Nexus Repository Managers servers that I showed on the previous slide, and decided that they were going to take their future into their hands and publish to Maven Central directly using our own documentation. And that activity just started growing and growing and growing to the point where by the end of that week, oss.sonatype.org, which is the primary Nexus Repository Manager instance that prior to February, everybody was publishing to, got so slow as to be unusable. We hadn't expected this scale. We hadn't expected, any triggering event that would force this mass migration. And we struggled, quite honestly, for several days. We canceled our original sprint plan and replanned the sprint in response to this one event. I have a couple of slides here that sort of track some of the numeric impact of the Bintray shutdown. And I'm going to talk first about the new tickets by type. I mentioned that we use Atlassian's Jira product for our issues.sonatype.org. And one of the first things that we did was, in response to the load, was tweet about it and tell the Bintray community that we were aware of what was about to happen to them, and that we actually wanted to assist them in finding a new home for their artifacts. The rules for publishing to Maven Central are slightly different from the rules that were in place for publishing to JCenter, so we didn't immediately and automatically migrate people. There are questions around ownership of namespaces that we had to sort out. We actually turned off a lot of our automated validation, started manually processing requests to migrate, just to be sure that people who were trying to squat on namespaces didn't actually lay claim to something that was already published on Bintray legitimately by that author. And we wanted to reach out to as many authors as we could and say, come on over, your space is reserved here for you to publish to Maven Central. And so the numbers here show this extremely high, step up in April, but I will tell you that there was just as high a step up from January to February. And I'm sorry that the first slide overlapped. I wanted to increase the size of this other chart. And that represents human toil. The central team was actually reaching out to people saying there are manual steps we have to do to migrate to, there are manual steps you have to do. We also needed to give everybody a place to migrate to. So that high-level architecture slide where I showed 3 Nexus Repository Manager instances, we had probably 3 at the time, and we spun up a completely new one that was completely empty and actually much larger than our original instance to start providing people an empty space for them to publish to, and the theory was that if we got people who were desperate to publish and publish soon, we could give them this great experience. It'll be fast because there's no other activity that they're competing with. We then realized that all the people who had projects on oss.sonatype.org who were publishing via Bintray to Maven Central were hammering that old host. So we started reaching out to them. A lot of this Jira issues that spike up were us saying, look, we believe that you are actually making the existing problem worse. Would you like to migrate? And in return for the little work you have to do to change a host name, you get a completely new server where your activity, will actually be extremely fast, and you will not feel any of the impact, from this extremely, torturous week of trying to, save yourself from this impending shutdown. And so we built up this new host templating from our original host, and we made sure that we actually had a process to build these new shards for oss.sonatype.org in a repeatable fashion. So anyone who has onboarded to Maven Central since February 25 has been onboarded to a host named SO1, shard01.oss.sonatype.org, which is still, as far as my metrics say, running at a fairly nice clip. Average deploy times on the order of 15 to 20 seconds. And once you've released on an oss.sonatype.org host, it's 10 to 15 minutes before it appears on Central. By comparison, during the Bintray shutdown week, people were waiting 1 to 2 hours for their build maybe to succeed, and if they didn't succeed, they'd wait 1 to 2 hours again. And certain people really had to go through this cycle and never saw their artifacts published until we actually migrated them to the new host. The other slide here, the other graph here, looks at the impact in terms of bandwidth. I think I mentioned, that from a request perspective, it's like 11 billion requests a day or a week. I can never get it straight anymore, because once the numbers get that big, they're just ridiculous. But I like to call out how there's this reasonable and logical increase in the first 2 months of the year in terms of the central bandwidth consumed. But you take this huge stair step up, right? So from 3.6 petabytes to 4.4 petabytes. That's over 22% in a single month. And that, I have to believe, it has to be related to the mass migration of people publishing their artifacts to Maven Central directly, verifying that the publication process works. And from that step, our usage of Maven Central has been maintained, by the rest of the chart. There's never really any close sort of monitoring of the growth and the success of Bintray. In fact, there was really no way we could do it, but I've always, thought to myself, Bintray must be successful because people use them. There's some really popular projects there. And, when I finally ran this analysis with the rest of the team, we finally were able to put a number on just how successful Bintray had been. They had been able to sort of get, this 20% number in terms of downloads, and they seeded it back to us in February of 2021. But it was a lesson worth learning. I feel like there was an opportunity here, for us to really provide a place of respite for a large part, a non-trivial part of the Java open source community. And it was rough, really, sort of managing our time and managing our resource to provide a viable solution. But then staffing and providing the right level of customer support, in our ticketing system to make sure that the experience, as awful as it was leading up to it, would not be repeated on the new infrastructure. And would not be repeated, unfortunately, isn't ideal, because I have another slide that shows you where we got to do the same dance all over again. I'm going to shift forward a little bit to May, the middle of May, actually. Is it been a year already? It's a nice positive story in terms of new development work. The central team, we staffed up not just to provide more operational support for issues of scale, for issues of technical support for the user community, but we also intended to enhance the capabilities that are available in Maven Central. If you published anything to Maven Central after May 12, you may have seen a Sonatype lift email that summarizes any potential, vulnerabilities in the dependencies found in your code. We actually sent an email out to 40,000 registered email addresses across all of the oss.sonatype.org hosts. Got a few bounces and a few unsubscribes. But clicking the View Report link in the email would bring you to this repository software bill of materials report, where every publisher who successfully releases on an oss.sonatype.org host is entitled to this information for free that breaks down security vulnerabilities found in that SBOM, So it's not just the code that's packaged there. It is the full set of dependencies that comes that gets built into it, and we categorize the threats and the number of components where the vulnerability is found. I actually included this test one, and I'll have people note, if you can see it on the slide, that this is actually a test email for us validating our log4shell research. Every piece of research we did in response to log4shell, we actually ran this report to validate that we would find the right things and tell people that if you're publishing, you automatically have notice now. It's trivial to unsubscribe if you don't want this information, but it is something that we believe makes the entire community more secure, makes it better. The information is not as detailed as something that you might find in some of our pay products, our Nexus platform, lifecycle, repo, firewall. But it is there, and it's so much better than nothing. It tells you that the thing that you just released on Central has these components, and these are the CVEs associated with them. And we believe that that this is information that the community should just have. And so we will continue to make this available for any user who signs up and releases on any one of our hosts. All right, fast forward to the end of 2021, and just when you thought you'd survived another year of pandemic, Log4Shell happens on December 9. The two links in this presentation are to a Sonatype blog that we wrote talking about our response to it. I'll go into details on Maven Central team's specific response to it. And then there's a link to the Log4Shell Resource Center. This is actually still up and running, and both of these screenshots are from that Resource Center. I remember running the reports, running the queries to generate the initial version of these reports as we were designing this and crafting our response. But I was reminded that these numbers are still being kept up to date. These queries run, I think, every day. And, it struck me, I got these screenshots earlier in the week, and this number here on the right, this 38%, if you can't read the text, I'll read it off here. These are vulnerable downloads in the last 24 hours. So 38% of the total Log4j downloads from Maven Central are still people downloading insecure versions as of whenever I took this screenshot, which was earlier this week. We have other charts. This chart right across from the 38% number sort of just gives you that visual. The red, that's that 38%. It's been several months since December. Why we're not all in the green is telling something. And, Sonatype continues to maintain this dashboard to highlight that, the work isn't done and that we, continue to be vigilant. Before I move on in slides, I actually was reminded me earlier this week that this this slide is the day-by-day breakdown over several weeks of Central. And so if there's anyone here who believes that open source software is only created or published or consumed on the weekends, that's not true, because the dips are the weekends. People go to work and use Maven Central, and then most of them go home. And I'm sure it's just the bots and your build systems that are building on nights and weekends. But, I'm still not sure what happened here in this spike. But it's an interesting view that when I just share the biggest number I can share that gets lost, that there is a little bit of, human behavior that's captured in Maven Central. If I have a slide that shows the month-by-month breakdown, you'll actually see that Maven Central consumption also responds to holidays. So December is usually a quiet time of year. Sometimes in the summer we see a dip in usage as well. So that's the end of 2021, and I've shown you the numbers that we're continuing to track right now. Let me tell you a little bit about our response. I feel like shortly before December 9, we started seeing very similar reports of slowdowns and timeouts, and I'm unable to publish to Maven Central, and those just kept building up. And after February and the Bintray shutdown, I think the team had prematurely breathed a sigh of relief, thinking, "Oh, we finally scaled, and our problems are all behind us." Well, let's think about this. Log4Shell, represents vulnerability in a logging component that is present in I don't know, make up a number that starts with 90. And that's probably the percentage of libraries where some insecure version of Log4j was being used. And if you're a responsible publisher to Maven Central, if you're being if you're just even if you're irresponsible, I think that the press and the suddenness of Log4Shell was really this forcing function to make you realize, oh, this is the perfect time to upgrade. Well, what happens when everyone who's ever published anything to oss.sonatype.org decides to publish in the same week? We were not ready for that scale yet again. Now, thankfully, we had an extra host that, even though we had much success migrating people to, is still fairly unloaded. So we mounted essentially a campaign where we asked for volunteers at Sonatype to help the Maven Central team do some outreach to everyone who's had a slow publish. And we're like, we know you're trying to do the right thing. The reason you're publishing right now is probably to publish a secure version of your library because that includes a secure version of Log4j. And let's remember, it wasn't just one version of Log4j that people needed to upgrade to. Over the course of those for a few days, it was like 2, 3. And so this publishing cycle continued for 3 days. And what we did was we mounted that outreach campaign and said, look, we want to help you, but we can't help you if you stay on the old host. And we were upfront about the cost to migrate. We said, you'll have to make changes to your build process. With luck, it's a tiny one. It's a change of oss.sonatype.org to so1.oss.sonatype.org. And over the course of that week, I think we doubled the number of people who were focused just on supporting the community and managed to migrate them before the weekend. I think that, we actually asked for volunteers who would help out over the weekend and got a handful of migration requests. But at the end of it, not only, were we able to, allow people to successfully publish their now secured components to Maven Central, but we put them in a better place moving forward, right? We continue to track the statistics on both OSS and SO1, and those continue to be, now that we've had all that activity sort of leveled across the host, they actually both are fairly performant right now. And we wouldn't have been able to respond as quickly as they did, in a matter of 2 or 3 days, certainly saving, if we looked at the full range, we did find 1 or 2 people who actually asked to be migrated close to the weekend, but the bulk of the work was 1 or 2 days. And that's because we already had the host. We already had the documentation. We were able to say, hey, Sonatype volunteers, here's the runbook. This is what you need to do. This is what you tell people when they say they want to be migrated, and these are the steps you do. And we were able to, actually reach out and assist the community in a time of crisis. Okay, so 2021 is in the rear window. Spring for Shell actually didn't have any of the same impact that Log4Shell did, so we can finally talk about looking forward in 2022. I think when that spring vulnerability, came out, we had just gotten done with, in a moment or a feeling of deja vu, in January, a lot of roadmap planning. And I think that, my greatest fear is that we were going to get completely disrupted all over again before we had a chance to start building for the future. Well, thankfully that hasn't happened. And I'm going to share a few bullets here and a few slides about what's next for Maven Central. We have this project underway called the Central Portal. And I don't know, Portal may conjure images of, the Portal boom of the 90s, I guess. And I think that, we were deliberate in the choice of the wording Portal, because what we want to do is actually put a consistent face on the experience of all the blind men that I showed in my earlier slide. Publishers no longer have to use a different interface from consumers, which is a different interface from the people who actually want to search and do research on interesting artifacts that they might want to consume. So the Central Portal is really geared at both of the large categories of Central users, consumers and publishers. A lot of the data that I showed in previous slides, that Sonatype Lift report, that's actually data that is also accessible now in another Sonatype property, OSS Index. And we asked people to sign up for accounts there, and we realized that the account sign up and the identity management process that we have tolerated since I joined Sonatype was all built around our instance of Jira. That's this issues.sonatype.org, which is never meant to do identity management. It was never meant to manage 40,000 users. So we are actually making a concerted effort to do a better job, to actually have a more streamlined sign-up process, and to actually make sure that the identities that we capture are easily accessible by other Sonatype properties. Sign up for Sonatype once, get access to all the Sonatype properties in theory. People have been asking about more data that you can get out of Maven Central. Two of the likely candidates that are coming out sooner rather than later are centered around popularity and categorization. Popularity is naively just download counts. I'm not sure we're actually going to end up publishing raw download counts because, once your numbers are giant enough, they have no meaning. I think we're going to trial a few things, and one of the things we've been toying around is relative popularity. What's the most popular version of your of your component, and that might provide insight to you as to whether you may need to do some outreach to move people to something that's a little bit more recent, or to just identify whether people are getting value at something older because it does everything they need and they don't need any of the special sauce that you've published since. So that will be an additional set of data that publishers or anybody, I think, who signs up to the portal will be able to access. And then categorization is actually something that we've never exposed before. You can actually get popularity data as a publisher via the central statistics link on oss.sonatype.org. So some of you may already know that you can get some popularity that way, but categorization is new. We have a research analytics team that actually did research and some manual work doing categorization of some of the most popular components in Maven Central, whether it's logging, whether it's unit testing. And we're now going to be able to surface popularity sliced by category, or allow you to search by category so you can see what component you're using now potentially, and maybe if there are alternatives to provide a natural transition to something either more modern or more secure. So that's something to look forward to inside this consolidated central portal. The last large bullet here talks about Sonatype's participation with the Open Source Security Foundation. These links, and I'm not going to click on them because they may interrupt my presentation, but this first link is a link to all the working groups that OpenSSF has. Sonatype is one of the founding members of the Securing Software Repositories Working Group. Maven Central is a software repository containing Java components, or any component targeting the JVM, so Kotlin and Scala. This working group includes not just us, but the people who run the other software repositories for other ecosystems: Ruby, Python, NuGet, NPM. All the players are there, and we are all working to the same goal. There are certain things that Sonatype does that these other repositories have found advantageous. There are certain things that they do that we want to learn from, all in the hope of providing a common set of standards and tooling that will benefit not just Java publishers, but publishers across all ecosystems. This final link is something that actually happened recently. On May 9, a press release was released about new additions to the OpenSSF governing board. Atlassian is one of them. Sonatype is another of them as well. This is sort of at a layer above the working groups I just talked about, where Sonatype will have a seat at the table for all the other working groups that aren't specific to just running a software repository. So that press release just came out, and I've only just started looking at the details. So you can click on the link once you get your hands on this presentation to find out more. This slide is actually just the top level of the portal prototype. And I'm only calling out a couple things I already mentioned in the bullets. Consolidated publish and browse view, so that consumers and publishers now have one place to go with, we hope, will be a unified user experience. This sign-in button doesn't say much, but I want to say that we are committed to a better sign-in and signed-up experience, and making sure that identity management is something we do right. And then I mentioned that we were going to start doing more things with popularity. We do not have category information in the system yet, so that is actually missing from this screenshot, but we do have popularity information. And this is just a landing page view of some of the most popular packages or publishers over certain timeframes. We're still looking for ways to visualize the actual popularity graphs to show you popularity of your components over time. Now, if any of this interests you, one thing I can say that is actually live, this one isn't quite yet, is a place where you can volunteer your help. We actually are looking for people to be granted beta access to the portal to get your feedback. And the incredibly catchy name is central-beta.sonatype.org. That link is live as of today. So if you or your friends are interested, feel free to send the link around and sign up. And I believe that we're targeting the end of May to reach back out to start getting people access once we actually have the production site ready and available. All right. My clock says I have 6 minutes left, and here we are, questions and answers. And feel free to ask me to, backtrack to any previous slide, but, I have been at Sonatype a long time, so, there's ancient history in this head as well. So I can provide a little bit more than just stories about what I've shared with today, not just 2021. Well, we have somebody in the row behind you first with the mic, and then we'll go to you next.
So Maven Central Statistics gives us the number of downloads for our open source component and also the number of unique IPs per thing. But we don't know how many of those are bots or CI jobs and so forth. And we've seen some indication that for a very old version being downloaded a lot still today. So do you have any way to split those up into actual users and CI downloads?
So I think that, we have never surfaced the user agents that we get with that, but I feel like that's probably a way where we can probably tease out that first pass layer. And I'll take that back to say that we do just give raw numbers. That's probably something that people are very interested in. They want to get legitimate downloads versus the bots. And yes, I've seen many of these graphs. I'm like, I don't know why JUnit 4.18 is the most popular thing month after month, right? It's not even recent. So yeah, user agents are definitely a thing that we have right now, and we'll see if there are other ways that we can track that. So you're in the front. You had a question next? Yeah.
So I have two small questions. One is even though Log4j shell was downloaded, the vulnerable version, like 37% or 35%, I know you mentioned you don't delete any content from the Maven Central, but didn't you thought of restricting it so that the people should not be downloading a vulnerable version?
Yeah, we thought about it and actually did not actually execute any of those plans. We thought about 403ing the vulnerable versions, and that would have just broken builds and not actually done what we really wanted to do, which was to get people to upgrade. We actually thought about rate limiting, actually make it painful for the build to actually succeed. It would complete, but it would complete eventually, and we figured that's probably just a different flavor of the same, sort of solution. In the end, we sort of backed off on it and did not act on any of those possibilities. That's something that I expect to come up more in some of the securing software repositories working group. I don't know how other ecosystems handle this, but one of the tenets of Maven Central, one of the reasons why we say what you publish is immutable, is that we don't want to break existing builds. If we do break existing builds, we have to do it for a reason. And for the Log4Shell case, the reason would have been to get people to migrate immediately. And there's no way that we could have guaranteed that with just blocking. It's no guarantee that people would have done the right thing. It would have just said, oh, it's failing. What am I going to do, right?
So is it possible in Maven Central, if someone is downloading the version X, and that could have been a vulnerability into it, you could be implicitly transferring them X.1, that is a more stable version, so that the end user should be unknowingly downloading a secure version, even though if I'm asking X.
I don't think I have enough time to answer that question here, but that creates problems. And
yeah, we should probably move on before we have a fight.
Exactly.
One more small question. So, which geographical region has the highest download from the Maven Central?
Oh, it's always the United States. I feel like it's. I've calculated regularly the number of different cloud provider IP ranges that hit Maven Central, and I don't know if there's anybody from Amazon here, but 22% from Amazon IP addresses, and primarily US East 1. So it's a lot of the geography. It's a hard thing to analyze because it's always routed through a data center, and that's usually where you see the hotspots.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the rules for publishing is that the artifact needs to be signed and the public key needs to be on a public key server. But there is no mechanism of verifying the identity or connecting it to the maintainers. Right. Is this supposed to change, or what is the reason behind this?
So I'm glad you asked this question. let's say that the existing requirement was very much aspirational, right? We figured like, let's ask people to vault this high bar, even if the Maven tooling doesn't actually do any automation around the signature checking. I will tell you that one of the working groups that Sonatype is participating in is investigating the use of SigStore and record formats to provide a consistent way of providing some of this identity checking and tooling that will actually do that as part of the build. I believe that Hervé here in the front row has actually built a proof of concept Maven plugin that will actually demonstrate signing something with SigStore, and you can check that, submit it to a record server, then download that later. That thing is then verifiable as part of your build as the gate before moving it on to publishing and release. And I get this at every show, every time I make a talk about Maven Central from Sonatypers. And it's hard to say, like, yeah, we had the best intentions, but we realized that not having that consistency in tooling makes it hard for us to justify why we could ask people to vault this bar. I think that having a higher bar to vault is an important thing because it convinces people of the seriousness of what they're publishing, but not having a way to close that loop and saying, how are you accountable if you're not the person who put it, really sort of takes away a lot of our, a lot of our steam and sort of continuing to ask people that. So the next thing we ask for, we will have a better story to tell around how the signatures are used. And I did not pay you to ask this question. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you very much for providing the service. This is
welcome.
pretty great for the entire ecosystem to have that. I'm going to ask a very direct question that somebody asked when I twittered about this. Was like, I assume this is not free as in beer. Who's paying for that?
Sonatype pays for this.
So like including the Amazon stuff and Fastly, all of that, or do they chip in? Can't talk about that in detail?
Can actually. I actually don't have an opportunity to talk about this all that often. Amazon has both Amazon and Fastly have open source support programs, and we applied 2 years running from Amazon. They actually gave us a significant amount of credits to actually offset the charges of running Maven Central. I feel like that first year, they may actually have offset 80%, and the second year was maybe 75% of the total costs. Fastly, we got in early enough with them that we, have been constantly negotiating our price down every year. And I have to talk to our account manager soon. I don't know if we're going to keep negotiating that. That is the lion's share of the cost. Like I said, when you take care of an elephant, it's costly. Yeah, it's real. And I feel like, we've had discussions about what offsets are possible. I don't know what the current state is, but this is part of our give back to the community. The Apache Foundation, the authors of Maven, they entrust us with this information, with this data, and they trust that we're going to be able to keep running it. We are never not going to provide a service like this. It may become prohibitively costly with the partners we have right now, but we'll find a way to continue to do this. I don't want to say forever, but I've been here 12 years, and we've seen these charges go up. Can't not keep paying these charges. We can't not serve the files up. And so the commitment's real. And, I think that, we'll continue to find ways to support the community.
All right. Thank you, Joel. I think we need to wrap up.